the New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Hey folks, greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain. Great to be back in the studio again after a bit of time overseas, and fantastic to have Seeby Woodhouse joining us back on the New Zealand Tech Podcast. How are you, Seeby?
Yeah, great, thanks. I don't know whether this is my fourth or fifth time on, but it's great to be back, of course, as
always good to have you on the show. And of course, you're owner and founder at Voyager Internet, but maybe you can just sort of remind people more broadly where you fit into this big wide world of tech.
Yeah, so a lot of people, I've been in the telco industry since I was 18 years old. Most people know me kind of most famously for starting Orcon, which then got bought by Cordia, then Call Plus, and there's now basically half of 2 degrees. So Voyager's my second time around, which I've been running for 13 years now. And Voyager's New Zealand's probably arguably 6th largest internet provider. So obviously, Spark will be number 1 and 2 degrees, and so we're number 6. So we provide about 1% of all New Zealand's internet, but we also punch above our weight in terms of providing about 1 in 5 domain name registrations. So we've got 120,000 domain names. So like, I don't think McDonald's is a customer, but like the example is McDonald's.nz or whatever. There's a 20% chance that that'll be provided by us through our subsidiary First Domains. And probably provides somewhere in the order of about 10% of all the web hosting in New Zealand. And we've got a cloud division where we've got like 1,000 virtual server customers, and also a product that we've had for a number of years is our cloud voice platform, which is kind of a homegrown version of like Microsoft Teams, and we have 5,000 Kiwi SMEs that use that. So a lot of small businesses are on our kind of IP voice platform.
Yeah.
Basically, New Zealand little battler telco, 125 staff, 40 million turnover. So it's a reasonable sized organization, even though we're based here in minnow, and small ISP in a small country is tiny compared to the giants of overseas and things. But we still like to think that we're substantial in our own way.
Yeah, no, it's great. Look, and I think we're big advocates on the New Zealand Tech Podcast for having competition, and we certainly appreciate the support we get in terms of our show partners, who I should thank, who are 1NZ, Spark, HP, 2 Degrees, and Gorilla Technology. And there's something that comes with the sort of scale that those firms bring that enables them to do certain things, and gives them that capacity to provide support right across kind of the tech and innovation ecosystems in New Zealand. But I think that there's also an important part for other organisations in the space to play. So yeah, it's always interesting having a bit of a catch up and hearing some of your perspectives. So you've got sponsors
of like 90% of the New Zealand ISP industry, but the small guys still run 10%. And as we like to say, if you want that more personalised, local kind of friendly service, as soon as you're with a big company, it's just harder for them to do that. There's nothing wrong with the big guys, but they just aren't going to provide the same personal service that a smaller company is. So some people like that, and some people want to go big, but we have our niche.
Yeah, well, there's something, and we may or may not get into it in this show, but there's also something to be said for being able to get in touch with the founders and chief executives in organizations, which sometimes becomes harder as organizations get bigger. But I have a particular story which we may not get to today, of how emailing the CEO of a Silicon Valley startup was very helpful to me in the last few days. But if we don't get to that this time, we'll pick it up another time. I've just arrived back from the US this morning, so we're going to talk a chunk today around something I've been really keen to do for a long time, which is to get in some autonomous, semi-autonomous vehicles, kind of the next level compared to what's been available in New Zealand. So we're going to delve into the experience with Waymo, and also the latest updates from Tesla with their FSD supervised, which we've talked about a fair bit on the show. But it was really me talking about based on things I'd seen and maybe, varying people I'd spoken with. But quite different to have had that first-hand experience. We also want to delve into what's going on with Google threatening to stop linking to New Zealand websites. There's some delving into Wi-Fi on planes, some issues that we're seeing, and maybe some opportunities on the horizon. Some scams that are going on, and probably important to be aware of, and also keen after those things to delve in and hear a little bit of what's happening in your world as well. So first up, Google's threatening to stop linking to New Zealand sites. We've probably have talked about this before, but they seem to be kind of doubling down on this rhetoric. If the bill, which is potentially moving forward, and I think initially National, it sounded like they weren't going to support the bill, the Fair Digital News Bargaining Bill, but as it happens, the coalition is largely sort of pushing ahead with this bill, and it is being referred to, certainly from the Google end. They're saying this bill proposes a link tax that would require Google to pay simply for linking to news articles. And they say, while Google supports efforts to foster a sustainable future for New Zealand news, this bill is not the right approach. And look, this is something I tend to look at things from try and get a viewpoint from differing parties' perspectives. Look, I can see we're in this situation for New Zealand media, partly because of the size of the market here. There's a whole range of things where our media is struggling, and of course we saw TV3 sort of news hub shut down their news operation, 200 or 300 people out of work. But media has been a difficult era recently. Television New Zealand, the News Today, government are continuing to put pressure on them to to balance their books, and so they've obviously had varying efforts from a layoffs perspective, but they're under pressure, I think, to save another 30 million. It's not an easier landscape, but if Google's commentary is correct, this idea that you're actually paying that they would have to pay a tax for linking out and actually pushing traffic to New Zealand media websites, that doesn't sound like it makes sense either. What's your pick on this? And I guess I should preface it that you're or that Voyager is the sponsor of the New Zealand Media Awards. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm probably a pretty good person to give a perspective on this and comment on it. Voyager is the sponsor of the New Zealand Media Awards. Don't want to put a foot wrong and say that I speak for the New Zealand media or anything like that, which is certainly not the case. But I know that definitely, media in general has been struggling, and obviously that started with the fact that papers were very physical. So then once they moved online, it's like, well, why are people you're not getting that 79 cents per newspaper or whatever.
This is the nature of digital transformation, isn't it? Every industry changes.
Yeah, and then if newspapers, well, obviously newspapers went online, the challenge that they've had is, even if without the social media companies like Google and Facebook, if you have a website which gives away news information, then you're not charging 79 cents or whatever it is for a newspaper. So then how do you make money from that? So then it was kind of, the answer is advertising. But the macro problem is that there's this massive squeeze for, I guess, what you would call like the attention economy. And the social media companies have essentially sucked up so much kind of value. Like they've essentially destroyed the traditional advertising market because eyeballs are on people's phones, and the social media companies are the portals to basically people's attention. If you've got people's attention, you've got revenue. And so, I mean, there's kind of internet service providers, which is one, a company that I run. we've had the same issue in that, telecommunications companies, we basically built the internet. So we built the undersea fiber, cables, the 4G towers, the infrastructure, all the stuff that makes your cell phone and your home internet connection work. Internet service providers built all that.
And it used to be
a really profitable enterprise, but
Yep.
essentially even internet service providers, what's happened is the margins have kind of gone to the social media companies because the advertising's gone to social media companies. And so all the infrastructure is kind of like not really valued anymore. And there's obviously really fierce competition. And yeah, when you digitize anything, that obviously the business model changes. So, the music industry went through kind of like a hail Jesus, moment when, Napster came out and all of a sudden is music going to be free? What are we going to do? And a lot of musicians have transitioned to kind of things like live concerts, making money out of live concerts as an income stream. And obviously, Apple Music and iTunes and Spotify may have solved a bit of that. But I saw a thing a while ago where Snoop Dogg basically said that, his entire royalty revenue from Spotify was like $25,000. So, I mean, Snoop's like one of the most popular hip hop artists in the world. If he's getting paid $25,000, from Spotify, and Spotify is the number one music platform, we're probably not going to see the same kind of lifestyle of musicians that's been before. And then does that mean that whole thing's destroyed? But trying to stay on topic, the social media companies, they're going to fight tooth and nail against anything. So you're going to say, Google say this is ridiculous, but the fact of the matter is the social media companies are so valuable because they have so much information on all of us. They have they have our name, they have our birthday, they have what we look at, what our interests are, whether we're gay, whether we're straight. They know all this information. They've got all our private messages. They know what we're saying to our friends. And so they can target that information to deliver advertisements, whereas a newspaper, they don't really know anything about most of their customers. If you visit a newspaper site and you do it anonymously, they don't know anything about you. So they just have to serve some random ad that's not relevant. And so they've, basically been left behind. So that the fact that social media companies have so much information, they can deliver such targeted messages and they're so juicy in terms of addictive type stuff. Facebook had a whole team of people, of psychologists working on how do we make our products more addictive, and so it's like candy for the ADHD, mind. You've got your phone in your hand, and anytime you need distraction, you just go to the social media companies now, and they've worked out brilliantly how to monetize that, and they're hundreds of billions, trillion-dollar companies, and then you've got, stuff in New Zealand sold for like $1 because the advertising's just got ripped out of them. So, the thing is that journalism is really important for, a stable democracy. And if journalism is really struggling through newspapers or even TV stations, all traditional media is struggling. If no one does that job, then, as a society, we could be in a massive amount of trouble because, you need journalists to go and dig up a story. You can't just have, I've seen this thing on Facebook that's gone viral from someone that has no idea what they're talking about. And then that's just as valid as like a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist who's done a whole lot of investigation. And so we have a real problem, which is a global problem, that these social media companies are not really paying their way. And the counter argument, which is kind of going through the courts in Australia's maybe leading the way in this, I don't know, but they've actually implemented a thing to say, if social media companies are getting attention from people's eyeballs and selling advertising on Facebook, but actually the content is a news article from a newspaper, you should pay that newspaper for that article. I don't really see that that's unreasonable. Google and Facebook are going to say that's unreasonable. Like, why should we pay? But there is an argument that it's reasonable, and that's what we're going to work through in New Zealand as well.
Yeah, well, you make a good argument, and look, I think there is that attention, and certainly on a lot of social media platforms, it's very common. I think probably largely agree with me on this one, in that you'll often see comments under something that somebody's posted, whatever platform it's on, and it's not, you don't get down too far before someone's, have you even read the article, right? And that actually it is, as you say, like, it is so much about the attention it creates, because the headline might be all that somebody takes in, and then they start commenting and posting and whatever they do, whether it's liking or or sharing based on the headline. And yeah, in a lot of cases, it doesn't necessarily lead to everybody clicking through and having the benefit. That said, when somebody does click through, then that platform is generating traffic for the news media site, and then that news media, ultimately that helps with their advertising. Cost per thousand, is one of the mechanisms they use to charge for advertising. So every eyeball that comes through helps generate something.
Well, the other thing that people don't really realize, and there was a TikTok that went like mega viral. I don't know whether you saw, and basically it was a woman who was sitting next to her boyfriend on the couch. They both had Instagram open, and then she commented on a photo that was like her friend's photo, and the photo had something that was like a husband and wife arguing about something. And so the girl commented, and then her husband knew the same people, so he commented, and then they looked at the comments, and basically all of the comments on the woman's version of Instagram was all like from other women and pro women and like having this kind of side. And then all the comments that were on the top of the guys one were all the guys basically saying thing. So there was basically a difference between the comments that each person was receiving on the same couch based on what their gender and everything was and their opinion. And it was like, if you look at the same photo on Instagram, you don't even get the same news feed, which was kind of a shock to a lot of people and me. I thought, if you look at an Instagram post, the comments are the comments. That's not the case. They actually literally customize the comments to make it as inflammatory and as attention getting and most likely for you to respond on a post by post basis. So there is no one article. There is no like single source of truth. If you go to the New Zealand Herald, you get an article and that's kind of what the article is. But on social media, even the same article is like presented to people differently. Different comments are rated at the top depending on whether they're going to provoke the most reaction. And you've seen terrible things happen, like the massacre in Burma, or I can't remember. There's a country essentially where Facebook was deemed to be responsible for an ethnic genocide because there was a series of posts that just went completely viral and they were unsubstantiated. But because they were attention getting, all of a sudden it turned into this firestorm of ethnic conflict.
Yeah, well, it's going to be an interesting one because ultimately governments have to make their calls. This legislation is there, and we'll see how it plays out. But if the likes of Google want to I guess pick a government to sort of play with, then you could argue that it's pretty low risk. Pushing back on the New Zealand government, bearing in mind, population, how much money they earn a reasonable amount of money out of New Zealand. To be fair, these companies, there's billions of dollars at stake. However, in the scheme of how much that they would lose compared to their kind of global revenues, New Zealand is probably a place to do it. And I guess we're 80% smaller than the Australian market, where it looked like they might push back on some things there. So I think we'll just have to wait and see how that plays out.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to give away $100 billion idea, but it's definitely frustrating for the consumer in terms of like I subscribe to the New Zealand Herald's online, and it costs me I think like nearly $20 a month. And it's just, one of these subscriptions that disappears out of my wallet. And then some months I won't even read the Herald. I'm like overseas and things, and then I'm paying all this money. And then it's like the other week, there was a couple of articles on the the New York Times that I wanted to read, and I didn't want to subscribe to the New York Times. But then I was like, I really want to read this article. So then I decided I'm going to subscribe to this, and then I've got like my Netflix, and it's all really annoying. And then so to me, I think the solution would be fantastic if there was some like global micropayment, kind of company. And it's like you read an article on the Herald or the Times, you pay 10 cents, and it's like that goes to pay a journalist. And if Facebook, is selling advertising, and then Facebook links to that story, then Facebook says, okay, well, we'll keep, 5 cents of advertising revenue. And then because we're getting advertising revenue, you get that article for free or a discounted rate or whatever. And there's all these kind of little things. So, I mean, if I could essentially pay as I go on the web. And it's like, if I'm reading and reading stuff on the web, I can read free articles from my friends or paid articles from whatever. And it's just like a little micro payment. And I just decide to do that. That would be great. But that's not been solved by anyone. But I think if that was solved, there'd be like a lot
for a decade or more.
Yeah, that would be something that would solve a lot of these issues between everyone.
Yeah, none of those micro payment sort of solutions have ended up sticking. Onto other topics. I flew from Auckland to Singapore in the last couple of weeks as one of my flights on Air New Zealand, and it was as though the satellite internet provided over Wi-Fi was just broken. Now I think you've probably got these scenarios where even though we've now got satellite internet delivered from low Earth orbit, satellites to airplanes, you've also got more and more people utilizing them, and I think basically got to a choke point of some form, and the internet was basically useless. So I was trying to fill out my arrival card, which for most countries now is online, right? So you're not filling out a piece of paper. Singapore's like that. In fact, Singapore, you can't even fill out the paper option. Well, there may be an option, but the first time I went through without having done it online, it just had a whole, they had a lineup of tablets that you could use if you hadn't already done it online. So I did that kind of the moment we touched down and turned on, and I'm on 4G or 5G. And away we went, but that was a really poor experience. Now, of course, Air New Zealand have announced that they're moving to Starlink, and in fact, there was some commentary from Greg Foran in what was it, CNBC in the States, just in the last few days, and he's basically making the comment that, hey, Starlink is kind of the service that every airline has to have, and Air New Zealand will be going in that direction, even right down to apparently they're going to be putting it on ATR 72. So turboprop aeroplanes flying regional routes are going to have they're going to be able to squeeze in Wi-Fi in flight soon. So a big change happening. Now, you've experienced this. You're on Hawaiian, which I think one of if not the first airline in the world to put in Starlink. What was that experience like?
Yeah, so basically I was on a flight from LA to Hawaii, the end of a US trip. I thought I'd go back. It was actually cheaper to go to Hawaii via Hawaiian and then back to New Zealand by quite a long way. So I chose that, and I thought I'll just stay in Hawaii for a few days because I love Hawaii. Who doesn't?
Good call.
Anyway,
good call.
I opened up my laptop and I was kind of like doing stuff on the internet connected to Hawaiian Wi-Fi. I'm like, oh, this is good. And yeah, I've done the New Zealand to USA leg and a bunch of other. I did New Zealand to Bali, and obviously New Zealand's great. They were one of the first airlines to have onboard internet, but quite often it says, it's available, it's not available. And, it'll sometimes drop out and they apologize. And I was on a 12-hour flight to LA and I actually really wanted to do some work, and the internet didn't work the whole flight. And then another flight, it seemed to be okay, but it's just a little bit erratic. Just to be technically direct, you said that the reason that airlines are having trouble is because the LEO satellites are overloaded. Well, Air New Zealand doesn't at the moment use LEO, which are low Earth orbiting, and Starlink. They use high Earth or geostationary satellites.
Okay, that's
which are like the
what
Intel
they
satellites.
moved to was a lot faster than the previous generation of
It might be MEO. So, I might be talking out of town, but I don't believe that Air New Zealand at the moment is using low Earth orbiting satellites.
Okay.
And anyway, so I was on a Hawaiian flight, and I was using the internet. It was great. And I just kind of didn't really think about it. Yep. I did have a subtle thought in the back of my head. Oh, this internet seems to be really good. I'm like, doing everything I want to do. Didn't really, and the guy next to me obviously had the same kind of thought. And I chatted to him a little bit. He seemed like he was kind of an IT tech savvy person like me. We'd had a 5-minute kind of chat. Anyway, he decided to do a speed test. So he opened up his phone, did a speed test, and got like 250 megabits on his cell phone. And I was like, oh, holy shit, like what the hell? And so we worked out that we were on Starlink, which I didn't know and they didn't promote. But, I'd kind of thought the internet was really good, but it was like, I think in New Zealand, I did a speed test once and it was like half a megabit at best, and like, 10% packet loss and 400 and 500 milliseconds. And, Starlink's like 20 milliseconds. So it was like really awesome. But Yeah, I mean, in terms of the challenge, so there's geostationary satellites and which is kind of the old Intelsat satellites with like very high latency.
Yep.
And satellites have what's called like a view cone. So with a geostationary satellite, they're so far out in space that they stay over a fixed portion of the Earth.
Yes.
But they have such a large view cone that they almost see half of the entire planet. So with geostationary satellites, you only need 3 satellites out in space, and you can cover the entire planet because they see basically 50% of the entire planet. So with 2, you might miss a tiny bit, but with 3, you basically get the whole thing.
Yep.
But low Earth orbiting satellites, what Starlink is, I believe there's 6,200 Starlink satellites now. They're so much closer. I believe there's somewhere between, I think they're nearly 100 times closer, and it could be wrong on that, but at least 10 times closer. So it's a massive difference.
Yeah.
And because they're so much closer, they have to go much faster in order to not, fall into Earth's orbit and burn up. So they're not stationary, they're whizzing around all over the place.
Yeah.
But because they have such a tiny view cone, they only see a very small portion of the Earth because they're so close. Yeah. And so, there has to be way more of them. They're way closer. It's way more complex. So it's a huge engineering challenge. But the upside, obviously, is that you get, much faster speeds and much incredible. And then there's medium, kind of height satellites, which have a little bit of, the characteristics of both. You need more than 3 to cover the entire planet, but it's not like 400 milliseconds, ping and things.
Yeah.
And so maybe in New Zealand's on medium height satellites. But certainly, I mean, what Elon's done is like a massive engineering challenge. And then, everything that Elon does, Jeff Bezos wants to do. So they're talking about another 6,000 satellites or 9,000 satellites to just do exactly the same thing, which I think is a waste of time, but it's pretty crazy. And then of course you have the risk of like space junk and all that kind of stuff crashing into each other. And space, they're talking about there is a potential, I was reading an interesting thing that potentially if there was like a catastrophic space disaster where satellites started crashing into each other and then causing junk to basically permanently orbit the planet, you might end up in a situation where we're permanently trapped on Earth and we can never leave in a rocket because essentially the rocket will hit junk, on the way out. Because there's just this like cloud of crap up there. So hopefully that doesn't happen. Hopefully we get to be a star-faring species like Elon wants. But the engineering challenge is pretty crazy. But yeah, the benefit is anyway, you can be on YouTube and be sitting in your seat and have 200 megabits, which I've experienced. So it's a game changer. But
and I just did a quick look, and looks like Air New Zealand have been using Inmarsat's Global Express, which is geostationary,
so that'll be like
equatorial orbit satellites.
Half a millisecond ping,
so they're a lot.
So
a lot further out,
20 times bigger latency,
So no, that's great. Thank you for correcting me on that one. Now delving into some other topics. We had in the news, and I got a call from media around this one last week while I was in the US. Joint operation by police that took out a smishing scam. And when I sort of delved into that a little bit deeper, and smishing is sort of phishing type attack via SMS, via text messaging. And it was quite interesting to delve into. So this is sort of the first documented case where somebody in New Zealand has set up basically a fake cell site, and these particular cell sites that are used for this type of technique, what they do, by my view, and you may have any other thoughts on it, but from the reading I've done, is they're basically trying to get mobiles that are within cooey of them to switch back to 2G. And 2G protocol, the protocols associated with second generation mobile networks are such that you didn't have the sort of authentication and so on that came with 3G, 4G, and 5G networks. So I think they basically try and mess with the other bands and interfere, and then have phones basically switch down to 2G. And then once a phone is on 2G, they're there to say, hey, we're here, we'll help you, and we're your official mobile network that you should be connecting with. And you can basically go in as any telco that you set the fake sort of cell site up as, and then you can basically send text messages at zero cost, because you've got people connecting to your cell site, and you can send them those kind of scammy text messages and basically some pretty serious fraud there, and pretty serious efforts in terms of messing with the telecommunication systems.
It sounds like potentially you know more than I do, but obviously people are pretty familiar with the concept of like a Wi-Fi SSID, which is the network name of Wi-Fi. So you open up your phone, you see a bunch of Wi-Fi networks, you click on the one you want to connect to, and that's what you're connected to. So obviously in a similar way, the network name that you're connected to often appears at the top of your phone, and that's normally your subscriber. But if you roam overseas, you might be a 2 Degrees customer or a whatever customer, and then you go to Australia and it says 3 networks or Hutchison or whatever. So people are sort of familiar with that. And if you have your phone locked to a specific network provider, then obviously your phone won't roam onto a foreign network. But if you have any cell site, then you can set it up with to essentially advertise whatever network name you want. And my understanding, and I could be wrong because you've said you have to force the phones down to 2G, but I believe you can buy a cell site and set it up as a 3G, 4G cell site and just get it to advertise a network name of, a similar network. Now, obviously, you run into issues where if you have 2 networks that have the same name, then there can be fighting around for things. But not having done the research before I came on the show about this particular topic. But I do believe it is possible to do the hack at 3G, 4G levels, and then you essentially what happens is you might connect back into the host telco network by being pretending to be a customer. So the hotspot effectively pretends to be a phone, and then it advertises itself as a network. So some phones connect to it, and then it's essentially doing a man-in-the-middle attack. I'm not 100% sure that you have to force the phones down to 2G. That's something I haven't heard. I think there are ways of spoofing the auth and things, but I could be wrong on that. So you might be right. But the general thing is that you can have someone's phone connected to what looks like a legitimate network,
and it's not.
And then you receive a bunch of text messages, and the telco, like 1NZ, has no record of those text messages because they were never sent from them. Now, the benefit to that of a hacker is that if you're sending traditional text messages, maybe say from overseas, I mean the wonder of GSM text messaging is that any telco can send a text message to anyone else in the world, and it kind of works through interconnects. But of course, all those text messages are traceable. So if there's, say, a spammer who wants to, do a BNZ, banking hack or something, they might have like an Italian SIM or something. They send text messages to a bunch of New Zealand numbers. But ultimately, all those text messages, if they go through the traditional telco channels, are traceable to some SIM or some person anywhere in the world.
That's right.
And then the local police can get involved in whatever. So the benefit of having a smishing box is that you have text messages that appear to come from any number, and because you're connected to a cell site, but they're completely invisible to the host telco. That's why. So it's interesting that this is the first case, but maybe not the last. And the kid that did it's clearly got some technical nous, because you have to have some pretty deep technical telco knowledge in order to do this kind of thing. So maybe he'll get repurposed as a white hat, kind of hacker down the line. But otherwise, I don't know whether the New Zealand government or whatever is probably going to throw the book at him. So his future's probably up in the air, but clearly a talented individual, but obviously on the wrong path at the moment,
Yeah, and we always hope those that get caught into these sorts of things when they're younger, will find a path and some good folks to be around them that kind of maybe help steer them in a good direction. Yeah, looking, I did a little bit of research about this. After I got a call from media outlet last week, and looked like you could buy these sort of boxes off the shelf with kind of everything you needed to be able to plug in into a vehicle and drive around to reach as many people as possible, which was apparently what happened in this scenario. Online it was something in the sort of $4,000 to $6,000 kind of range. So I've seen varying prices online. So
Yeah, I mean, you might not find it. I mean, there might be a bit of pearl clutching of how can it be that these terrible devices are for sale? But you have to remember that they're essentially telecommunications devices. So, like you can go and buy, any citizen can go and buy telco grade routers and internet, equipment and all kinds of things, and Wi-Fi boxes, and people essentially do the same kind of thing with Wi-Fi hotspots. So you have to be pretty careful about connecting to open Wi-Fi hotspots, because there are malicious people who purposefully give away free Wi-Fi in busy city centres. And then if you happen to have anything unencrypted that goes across, they can then sniff that, and then they'll use that against you. And there still is a portion of internet traffic that's not encrypted, and so people get caught out, with that, or present, things like fake websites. So say for example, if you have a malicious Wi-Fi router, and someone says, "Oh, this has got free internet, I'll join that," well, then the person that's operating that Wi-Fi router can control the name servers that are given to you. The name servers then control the IP addresses of whatever. So someone can then spoof Google, spoof Facebook, pretend to be other websites, pretend to be BNZ. There's all kinds of attacks that can be done. And so free Wi-Fi hotspots are actually a pretty serious attack vector. So unless you know the provider, you've got to be careful. And this is just a similar thing in terms of like the telco world.
Yeah, look, there's a lot to be said for just roaming on 4G, 5G, when you travel to stay safe.
Apart from the cost,
those mechanisms, right? So obviously it depends on where you're going and so on. And we are starting to see more scenarios where, say, roaming to Australia is built in. 2 Degrees have done that for some time. I'm not sure if Spark do, but 1NZ on one of their plans, bundles in, certainly on one of the business plans, they bundle in Australia roaming now as a sort of standard option. So those things are getting easier, and I imagine that will continue.
Yeah, well, I mean, actually, a bunch of your listeners will probably be pretty jealous, but I used to live in the US for sort of 4 years on and off, and had an apartment in LA, and so I got a US cell phone plan. So on my iPhone 15, I've got 2 SIMs, and I still have a New Zealand number and a US number. And US telcos, I mean, the internet kind of started in the US, and US telcos are just like the big dogs, so they have like the bullying type stuff. So I actually have a US plan that costs me $65 a month, and I have unlimited data roaming in just about every country on earth apart from North Korea, and I've had that for like the last 8 years. So I don't worry about roaming anymore because I've got a US telco. That's just not widely distributed. So there's a saying, the future is not the future is already here, it's just not widely distributed. So unlimited global roaming exists if you're a US citizen, and a lot of people don't know that. So but it'll get there for everyone. It's just, as a New Zealand telco, you just don't have as much power to negotiate with every other telco. But someone like AT&T is just like, "Oh, you give us roaming or else,"
Yeah. Well, let's jump across to talking about autonomous vehicles. Now, there is going to be potentially a little bit more on this next week, because Tesla have their robo-taxi sort of announcement coming up in Los Angeles end of this week, New Zealand time. I think Friday. I think it's listed as the 10th of the 10th in the media or in their invite. 10th of the 10th. So there's a lot of people kind of talking about online. What's this event going to be? What's the robo taxi going to look like? what's the technology that's sort of built in, what will it cost to ride one, et cetera, et cetera. Is it basically the same as the technology that's in a lot of existing Teslas today? So there's been a topic we've talked about, over a period of years, but I've been very keen to I guess, hands-on or hands-free with this technology. You and I have had accesses to varying sort of levels of the technology, within our Teslas in New Zealand, but the very latest iterations of Tesla's technology certainly haven't been broadly made available within the New Zealand market. They've done some tests here and so on, behind the scenes. So I had a look at that. There's also the technology from Waymo, where you can, in 3 US cities, you can go and jump in an autonomous, very much like catching an Uber, ride sharing type service. Fire up the app, tell it where you want to go, it'll come and pick you up and take you there. And there's absolutely no human driver in there. You just get in there. And so, just wanted to really, I guess, get a feel for where's this technology at right now. The Waymo experience was really interesting. Besides me leaving my phone behind in the Waymo, you can't call the driver to ask for it. But fortunately, the next passenger jumping into the vehicle answered when my son called them. But it works really well. Seems to be getting quite broad use. It's not a particularly cheap service. I think they're shorter. When I tried it anyway, which was on Sunday in San Francisco, the minimum fare was around $17 US, and even if you're just going for a 3-minute trip, that said, at varying times it's reasonably hard to get rides in busy cities like San Francisco.
Yeah, did you already cover or I imagine you would have seen the media around the honk-pocalypse? There was like a hashtag honk-pocalypse.
Yeah.
And basically there was like San Francisco residents getting like really pissy because the Waymos have a thing where if the car in front doesn't move for a certain amount of time, it'll use the horn to hurry someone up. And then at the Waymo depot, they've got like several hundred cars. So then they were getting into traffic jams, and all of the Waymos were like honking. So you got like 600 Waymos backed up, all honking, and you got poor residents. And then there was another thing where they had Waymos in like a random city block where they were all arrayed around the block, and so the Waymos were like stuck all up, like beeping at each other.
Yeah.
And so it's not perfect, but
definitely not.
Yeah, I mean, to reuse the phrase I just used like 5 minutes ago, the future is often here. It's just not widely distributed. And so autonomous stuff is kind of here in terms of Waymos, and Tesla's FSD is getting really good. But I had someone who talked to me the other day, and I was I've got a Tesla, so I was talking about kind of autopilot and stuff. And I had someone that said, like autonomous cars are never going to get here. The technology is not going to exist. It's just a pipe dream, kind of come on. And I was like, it already kind of exists in some cities. And they were shocked. So a lot of the population, kind of thinks, it's just not going to happen. So there's a segment of the population, probably not your listeners, who don't. It's just this kind of thing that, I think what happens with advancing technology is often it's a pipe dream, and then bam, it's here, and then it changes the world. And I think autonomous driving is going to be one of those things where people have heard about it for a long time. It doesn't seem to arrive. So a lot of people have kind of been like, it's never going to get there. And then one day it's just going to be everywhere, and it's going to work well, and the problems will be solved. I think I saw a thing about 4 years ago where there was Elon has a habit of obviously over promising a lot and getting everyone hyped up. So that I saw this would have been years ago, a guy bought a Model 3 on the basis of Elon saying, you'll be able to use it as an income stream, it'll be a robo-taxi, it's going to be released next year. And this guy was absolutely livid, like, Elon's lied to me, etc., etc., etc. But Elon usually delivers in the end, so I think at some point it's going to get there. And maybe this event on the 10th, we're going to see some of that. I do personally kind of wonder about the viability of like a fully camera autonomous driving platform, because I just kind of worry that there are some downloads. Obviously, the Waymo solution has like all the sensors and LiDAR, and they have a radar system on top and everything.
Yeah, you're probably talking a $250,000 vehicle, right?
Yeah, that's
order
pretty
to
bulletproof.
operate. Yeah.
But, like I use Tesla Autopilot, and it's absolutely fantastic on, motorways and things. But I had a thing the other day where I was using Autopilot to get up to my, lodge that I own and walk with, Woodhouse Lodge. And I always just kind of autopilot on the motorway, and then, just can relax and let the car drive. And then it started pissing down, and of course all the cameras got obscured, and then it's like, oh, beep beep beep, you got to take over. So I'm like, well, how's that going to work? Like, cameras get water on them and raindrops, and like, is Tesla ever going to solve that? How are they going to solve that? What's the car going to do? Like, if the car suddenly can't see, it's a real problem. But a Waymo doesn't have that problem because it's got radar, basically. So I don't know about this promise of like full self-driving. Like, a Tesla's going to be on a highway and then just all pull over every time it rains. Like, I don't know that there's a solution for that. So there's some things like that as a Tesla owner. I'm like, how is this ever going to be solved?
It doesn't. I mean, to be fair, it doesn't do that in typical. It's pretty serious rain when it does that. Like, you can be driving around in rain and it's no problem at all. But when the rain gets, when the rain gets extra heavy, so there are some of these sort of nuances where. I find it quite fascinating, and I do wonder what is the solution end up being. So that for me, with Tesla FSD, which is the full self-drive, software in the US at the moment, their latest iteration is called Tesla FSD supervised, and so this was a Model Y that I drove over the weekend, and it had that software available on it. What I found were some quite interesting shortcomings, but for the bulk of my experience was, hey, this is really, really good. Like, it'll take you, out of a car park. In fact, yesterday I was charging this vehicle that I'd rented via Turo. That was the company where I had to email the one of the senior leadership. To solve some issues I was having with their service.
Great. I love Turo.
So an amazing platform when it's working. I had a little bit of an obscure case, but they solved it for me. But I was just at Supercharger before returning the car, and I was able to basically, tap into autopilot. It drove out of the park that I was in, and it drove basically through the car park and out onto the street, and drove me virtually the whole way. I think there was one case where it was being a little bit slow, and I put my foot onto the accelerator to give it a little nudge along. But other than that, it got me from there to where there's a long-term parking at San Francisco airport where I needed to drop off, the vehicle. I did then drive it into the car park and did that side of it. But yeah, pretty impressive experience. But yeah, the shortcomings I found were, the odd sort of slow start, or it doesn't get started. Maybe it can't get you out of a particular kind of, parking area, and you do need to drive yourself. There was a case quite near to my accommodation where I was heading out to catch up with a friend in another part of sort of the San Francisco Bay Area, and it took a slow start, and so the vehicle behind me was kind of tooting, going, "Hey, get a move on." And so I think in that case, I just put my foot on the accelerator and gave it a nudge. But other than that, a lot of journeys were very much sort of, start to finish, other than really getting out of the car park and then parking at the other end. And it looks like Tesla are actually doing quite a bit of work on both of those areas. So there may be a resolution. The other situation, in fact, on that same journey, I got a situation, and this one is quite worrying if we think about a future in which we want to be able to fall asleep in our vehicles, because you definitely couldn't with this scenario. So I came up to a set of lights. There was a green light and there was a red arrow pointing to the left. I needed to go left. The Tesla did not brake, and so if I had, just let it keep driving,
Well,
it
you
would
know
have
that in the US you're allowed to turn left on a red, right?
allowed to turn
that
right
doesn't-
on a red, but I was
right on the red,
turning
yeah.
left across the traffic, right?
Oh shit. Okay.
So other scenarios, it followed the US rules and it turned right on a red, when it was safe to do so, and it did that on plenty of occasions. But this was turning left across traffic, and it was keeping going, and so that's where the technology, you recognize, hey, this technology is not fully there. It's not fully baked there, because it, could have driven me into it. Now, I actually could have gone through, and you could have made the judgment of like, hey, you're going to be all right, you would get through, but you're breaking the law, and just dumb thing to do. So I braked there. That happened on one other occasion. The other scenarios that I got, and this depends on where you go, but I kind of went all over a bunch of places, and there were two scenarios where I went under these kind of mini tunnels or bridges, under other roads and so on. And what happens is, it was a bright, sunny, hot day in San Francisco. The camera on the vehicle, because it is, the way these sort of cameras work. Yeah, there's this sort of light balance and or white balance situation when you change from being outdoors to suddenly being in a really dark area. It takes a little while for the camera to adjust, a little bit like our eyes, take to adjust when we go into a really dark environment. And on two different occasions, not on every occasion that I went into these scenarios, but two different occasions, basically the vehicle, did its beep as you experienced in the heavy rain and told me to take over.
Yeah.
And so it was just like, whoa. And I put it straight back into, full self-drive mode on one of those occasions straight away. And it was no problem. It just picked up and took over again. But it was just, there was maybe going to be half a second or a second there. On one occasion, I was following a cyclist who was, right in the middle center of the lane. So I could, I was thinking, I wonder if that's to do with the cyclist, and it's worried that, we're quite close to a cyclist and it can't see. The next scenario, there wasn't anybody that had been in front of me, but it did exactly the same thing. Now, I guess here, when I think about Waymo, one of the things around Waymo, and you'll see similar in places like China, where in Wuhan you've got autonomous, robo taxis or driverless taxis as well, is these services tend to run within a geo-fenced area. So it's just a very specific part. So when I wanted to try Waymo, I would have tried it probably from the airport if it had been available. But it wasn't. It's geo-fenced just to downtown San Francisco. So it didn't even cover to the airport. So they picked an area that they've got really high confidence that the service is going to work in. Now, you could argue this sort of two ways. One, that it couldn't go brilliantly further afield. Or the other is, hey, if you pack them all into a really short, small space, then there's always going to be vehicles available, on tap, and they're going to get the best return. And, the vehicles are going to get better and better and better at that very small, tight area. And it could be a combination of the two. But it did leave me wondering when I had those sort of poor experiences with the Tesla's full self-drive. And when I say poor, they were poor if you put them in a context of it being a robo-taxi and there being no driver. Like, that would have been not a good position to be in. If there's a driver who is there to supervise and to pay attention, those were no drama at all for me as the driver, because it did most of the work. But it'll give you a slap around if you're not, focused on the traffic. So it's looking at your eyes, and if your eyes are elsewhere, then it's going to warn you basically to take over. And if you misbehave too many times, then you'll actually lose access to the full self-drive.
I suppose another macro thing is the scenarios you've highlighted is basically kind of indicated that Tesla full self-drive is not really where a good human driver is, but it's getting close. It's capable, but it's not as good as a good human driver. It's probably better than a really terrible learner driver, a lot of the time. But the thing is that in order for self-drive to get widespread adoption, they really, Elon, Tesla, whatever, they really have to prove that it's superior to a normal driver. Otherwise, you can't really get widespread spread adoption. And that's the thing, because obviously essentially cars are like rolling death machines, and the first couple of times when you have a pedestrian in a pram or something gets splattered, it's going to be pretty bad, bad PR. And then it's like, how do we adjust to that? So there's that's why I kind of think the Waymo LiDAR type stuff just gives me a little bit more comfort, because LiDAR is basically a form of radar. And so the thing about radar is you're really seeing the absolute truth about objects, physical objects, and things that might damage and hurt people that are there. Whereas with with Teslas, and they're just essentially doing image recognition. If a pedestrian or something happens to blend into the background and look like whatever, then there's a chance of them getting hit. And they've solved a lot of that problem, but I just worry a little bit more. But ultimately, it's going to depend on the quality of the software. But I think having that additional information to the car sensor from LiDAR probably gives it a lot greater certainty that it's not going to run someone over or something like that. So it'll be interesting to see whether Tesla's long-term succeeds. But I mean, we've already had situations where obviously people using, full self-drive or autopilot have fallen asleep and then had accidents, or the cars had accidents. So I was kind of surprised that they hadn't really taken Tesla out a bit. Now, obviously, there is a certain amount of patience from regulatory authorities and the public to be happy with your car driving you places that I didn't know that was kind of there. I kind of figured the first time Tesla had an accident with someone on autopilot, that would be the end of it, and it'd kind of be banned, and then there'd be this whole additional hurdle. But that hasn't seemed to happen. So I think we're going to get full self-driving, but I mean, it's just, there's the whole trolley problem, because how do cars do that? If there's two bad situations, plow into a mother and baby in a pram, or have an accident or something, what's the car going to choose?
Yeah, I don't think that sort of level of even being able to distinguish that at this point. It's
no, I watched.
We're way off that. Oh, there was one other scenario that that I did experience, which was its inability to read one-way signs.
Which is a concern.
So I had two interesting scenarios. One where it tried to turn down what was a little one-way street. Maybe it was just that one where it tried to turn down a one-way street. The other one, it was a street that was blocked off for an event, and it started nudging towards, and it was like, I could see with my eyes that it was clear that street was fully closed, and it took a little while. It kind of got quite close before it realized, and then turned around. But I do wonder if they were to take the Tesla's full self-drive and put it on, say, a subset of San Francisco, downtown San Francisco, or whichever area they pick, in terms of how that might perform, against, say, Waymo. Of course, Waymo's been going a lot longer, January 2019. So they're over 15 years old that they've been trying to build this technology. After 15 years, they're still limited to a small amount of geographies, but arguably they're the best and they're leader globally. Clearly, Tesla and some of the others, like New Zealand founded Wave AI, which is based in London. And for those that haven't seen any videos of Wave AI's tech, that's really worth looking at, because they seem to be on quite a similar track to Tesla, and using cameras. And I guess there's always that argument with camera only is like, hey, that's what humans use. One of the other interesting things there is that Tesla sort of share data regularly around accidents in their vehicles versus what's norm in other vehicles. And the stats of when people are driving with the autopilot type technology on, the number of accidents is is considerably down versus normal drivers, of everyday vehicles. So, I certainly, I guess, felt like a lot safer having Tesla FSD supervised doing the bulk of the driving, especially as I haven't driven in the US for maybe 5 years or so, and trying to work out the lanes and all the sort of different distractions. I felt safer with that than if I was personally driving. I was still supervising, so I was still looking out for those oddities, and I was ready to take over. But actually, that was where my confidence level is. So if we look to sort of the announcements coming up, this week from Tesla around robo-taxis, how they're going to do it. If I was sort of to look back a month and you'd ask me, can they do it? Does this announcement make any sense at all? I would have said it doesn't. It really doesn't make any sense. Their vehicles are too far off. It can't work. As I've been thinking about it and experiencing some of this tech and looking at Waymo that operates within kind of a quite a small area, I think if Tesla are going to make this announcement, either their heads, they're kind of thinking that they can operate based on technology they don't have yet. Maybe they know something we don't know. Maybe they're just doing sort of the usual sort of Musk thing, which is say, oh, yep, this technology's here, and then actually it takes a whole lot longer, which could create a lot of drama with shareholders and so on if they announce something that they just can't deliver. Or maybe they are actually closer to it than what we think, and maybe that would be by operating it in sort of maybe some small geofenced regions that they're able to really double down and get their testing and things operating really well, so it fully understands how to read the traffic lights in those areas, what to do when we went through an experience where because of this big festival that was on, the traffic lights, while they were still operating, there were police there waving people to cross the road and waving vehicles through, and the Tesla handled that like a champ. It did a great job. Through in that scenario. So if they can maybe limit it and don't just say, look, you've got all of America that you can drive on, and our robo taxis are going to be everywhere. If they start that maybe in a Waymo type way of a geofenced area to start with and get really, really good at that, and then sort of slowly move it out, or maybe a bunch of areas. But by saying, hey, we're gonna, which was always on my mind of like, well, they're designing this technology to work everywhere, they should be rolling it out globally, or at least across a really broad region. That would be one take. But there's probably a few other approaches that they could take for this announcement that mean we might not be waiting 5 years. On the flip side, they might come out and say, hey, we're there, we only need to get to these points ticked off our list, and then we're going to start putting robo taxis on the road. But the one sort of key thing that I see that Tesla has is this massive fleet of vehicles, right? And the vehicle I was in was a 2020 Model Y, I believe. And so this is a car that's 4 years old. They've now got millions of vehicles that have got the technology in them. So, you think around, if anybody else wanted to roll out, say, robo taxis into, let's say, the New Zealand market, for instance, right? And that is, okay, the technology is here, we're going to roll them out. That'd be a really big deal to get vehicles to New Zealand and so on. But when you've got actually a fleet of vehicles that's already in the country, there would be a portion of Tesla owners that would say, oh, this is interesting. I'll make mine available to be on the network to try out, right?
If you knew that Tesla was absolutely going to announce the robotaxi service on the 10th, you'd want to be shorting Uber stock pretty hard. That'd be a good play.
I just don't know how it's going to come out. I mean, I wouldn't be buying or selling Tesla stock at this time. So I've just no idea. Or I wouldn't have confidence in what their approach is going to be for how they're going to do this announcement, what the timing will be. They've touted a dedicated robo-taxi vehicle that's made just for being a robo-taxi. But of course, the thing they've got up their sleeve is this fleet of millions of vehicles that they have, publicly advised you will be able to make money on, putting your vehicle onto their kind of autonomous Uber-like or Waymo-like network, but without there being anybody in the vehicle. Of course, there's a bunch of other things to, wireless charging for vehicles and other things to make that really easy, or the what was it, little autonomous sort of snake thing that would plug the charger in when a vehicle sort of pulled up. There'll be a bunch of bits and pieces, but I'm sure they'll have a fair bit to kind of share later on the week around that.
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna be pretty interesting. Obviously the Tesla self-driving software is unbelievably complex, being And I don't know whether in the future we'll sort of see any of these like ghost in the machine type, effects where, the ghost in the machine is kind of a name for like software that just suddenly seems to do a random thing that no one can really explain. And it's just got too complex. I don't know whether you've seen in the news, but there's been a couple of incidences where, Teslas have basically gone like runaway acceleration or like done something really weird. So there's been a couple of cases where essentially a Tesla's just gone full acceleration for like no reason. Accelerator pedals not pushed, and it's just decided, because it's all drive by wire. Like the amount of power to put into the motors is purely a decision that's made by the computer based on the position of the accelerator pedal and the current speed and things. So there's been a couple of Teslas that have gone basically bananas and it just essentially said, okay, apply full power to the motors. I think one guy survived and one guy didn't. And there was like Anne Heche, I think she died as an actor. I'm not sure whether she was driving a Tesla, but her car appeared to go down a suburban street at like 200 kilometers an hour and then slam into a house for no reason. And so that was either like I think she might have been driving a Mini, but it would have either been like a stuck accelerator pedal or something. It's kind of like
I think Tesla have pushed back on those things because there was something in I think it was China around that where they came back and I think the court ended up siding with Tesla. So I don't know.
Not trying to make people scared, but
I don't know the realities of those.
It is pretty interesting in the abstraction. Obviously, like an old car, like if the engine goes runaway or you get an accelerator. I had an old Ford Laser and I didn't maintain it when I was a kid, so I was a teenager. Yeah, and I got a stuck accelerator cable once, and obviously. Dear. The accelerator pedal leads to a physical cable, which leads to the carburetor. And if that cable jams in its sleeve, then you can end up with an accelerator thing. But I just instantly figured out what was happening. Turned the ignition off, put the car into neutral. I had multiple ways of stopping it. Handbrake, physical brake, turn the ignition off, all these kind of things. In a Tesla, it's like if the car starts accelerating and you're not doing it, like what do you do? Like it is what it is. Like there's no button, there's no off thing, there's no anything. Like you're at the mercy of the car. So, and then once it's actually driving itself and doing that and making decisions, like we're getting very removed from,
Well, and I should mention the name of their event, which is going to take place at the Warner Brothers studio in Los Angeles, called We Robot. So if you kind of want to think of some worst case scenarios, look at the iRobot movie. So they're having a little bit of fun there. But look, it is important for us to think around the downsides of technologies and how if things aren't well thought out, how badly they could go wrong. And we have to consider that stuff. Look, I think that from a software perspective, Tesla seem to have put themselves in a really good position, and their software seems to have been designed in a way that leans more towards safety than random crazy things happening. But when you lean into AI systems, there are some risks, and certainly hence why they must use that FSD supervised terminology at the moment rather than just this is autonomous, this is full self-drive.
Have you ever experienced your Tesla rebooting? Because I've experienced that a couple of times, 2 or 3 times. So basically, essentially I'll be driving along the motorway, and then like my central console screen, the dashboard, everything will go completely black. But the accelerator pedal and the brake and everything will work perfectly. So the car's still fully drivable, but it's like the central computer just has like a blackout and then takes a minute to come back and then everything kind of pops back. But if you're on autopilot,
logging that under warranty.
If you're on autopilot or anything, all of that's gone. It's just literally there's like a base level of command that the car has where the pedals and everything work as a normal car, indicators and all that sort of stuff. Light. So I never felt it was super dangerous. But if you were on autopilot, it would be gone. And my car's had that 2 or 3 times. I mentioned it to them. They're like, oh, sometimes it happens. Computer reboot. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
So apparently
I've rebooted while driving and I was like, what's going on here? Is it the LTE? Is it the connectivity? I'm trying to get a map or something. Yeah, you can hold both buttons down and it's no, it doesn't have any impact on your direct driving because it is more the entertainment system than it is because you've got, multiple, levels of compute. And you've got the system that drives the screen, and I guess the varying levels, and I'm not quite sure where exactly how those delineations are. So did you find your autopilot dropped when that happened? Right.
Yeah,
maybe I
the
haven't
first time
tried
the
it
first
during
time it happened, it
autopilot.
was a bit scary because like my whole screen and everything went blank.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And like when the screens are so big, you notice I was driving at night and everything went black.
Yeah,
but the headlights were on. Thankfully.
Yeah. The indicators don't work, as my recollection. So when you're rebooting, your indicators, well, they might work, but you can't hear them inside, I guess, because the tick, tick, tick sound probably comes through the entertainment system. Yeah. So as it's ticking, you don't hear that and you don't get a visual, but they may work outside the vehicle. I haven't actually experimented
I mean,
with
if it happens, it definitely makes you feel like you're driving an iPad,
Yeah. One thing that I wasn't aware of, like, Rivian, has been kind of coming through as quite a competitor to Tesla, and I think one of the more recent announcements we heard about is that Volkswagen are basically I think it's Volkswagen if I remember correctly, but one of the big automakers basically leaning in with an investment into Rivian. And part of their arrangement is they'll get access to Rivian software.
Right.
And Rivian, when you look at all the videos and the screenshots and so on, the Rivian software looks really good, right? As a Kiwi, that was my impression. Just things that I had seen online was like, well, the Rivian software looks really sweet. This is kind of
Rivians have a few
Tesla sort of class, right? It looked amazing. Well, the feedback I got, talking to the first person was someone whose family owns both Tesla and Rivian, and they'd gone down the Rivian track for a Ute rather than a Cybertruck.
Yeah,
and their comment was just the Rivian software is junk compared to Tesla's. So they said that's a really weak point. And then the other was a Cybertruck owner who I spent a chunk of time with and got a good demo of the ins and outs of the tech on the Cybertruck, and they made sort of the same comment that there's a huge kind of difference software wise between the two, so that maybe doesn't bode so well for those automakers who are thinking they're going to be at the pinnacle of technology by taking on Rivian's kind of software for their vehicles. So maybe Tesla are actually still in a very in a very forward position when it does come to their software, which was interesting because today when I look at a vehicle, the software is as important as every other aspect. And I guess what we're seeing with things like the FSD, the full self drive, coming through on Tesla, there's no other automaker that's kind of certainly within their sort of price point, rolling out this technology, right across their fleet to
it may be that the other automakers capitulate at some point, and that's what's happened in the US with the charging network. So obviously Tesla was by the first electric car company in the US, and so they've got a huge national supercharger network. And so now all other companies a couple of months ago, Ford and everything, said, we were going to roll out our own chargers, but we're just going to use Tesla chargers now. So in the US, effectively, Tesla will own the electric charging infrastructure. In New Zealand, we've got ChargeNet was an independent just being bought by one of the power companies, and then you've got Tesla, and so the plugs are kind of incompatible. And I was a little bit surprised that ChargeNet didn't get bought by Tesla, and then it would be like Tesla everywhere as well. But maybe the smaller markets they can't do things. But if Tesla owns the US electric charging infrastructure and the other car companies are just like, okay, we're just going to license that, it's not impossible to think, well, the other car companies essentially will just eventually license full self-drive the way that CarPlay is available in every car, and Android Play or whatever it's called is available, and it's just kind of like a feature. If you want self-driving, you push the Tesla thing, and your Ford turns into like Tesla software basically, and it has to have 8 cameras and it has to have this, and then it's compatible.
Yeah, well, that could be Wave AI, right? That could be a success story because that's it's a Kiwi, that's running that out of the UK. So there are obviously others doing that stuff. Tesla are very keen for people obviously to license their their technology. I don't think they've had any takers at this point. So yeah, I think we've got a pretty interesting time ahead, but we are now kind of in that world where a pretty interesting level of autonomy is available, but it's certainly not there yet. And that was kind of my experience anyway in the US. It has, interestingly, one of the things that's been hard for Tesla is getting a consistent result across all their vehicles. So there's different levels of hardware. So some of them have got their FSD3 hardware, which was the previous generation chip. Some of them have got the FSD4 hardware, which is their current generation chip. There's an FSD5 chip that they're going to be launching, and then there's getting it working in different vehicles. So the Cybertruck that I was having a look at on Saturday, after catching up with a friend, had just gone on to the FSD supervised, but he'd had that for maybe 6 months, and that capability hadn't been available because Tesla were trying to rework it and make it work on that particular hardware, and get the software all operating, and it had taken them this period of time. So I can imagine that there's going to be complexities the more vehicles that a company has, trying to get all these different bits and pieces to line up. So, Tesla not having a lot of vehicles, that's been an easier experience for them. Oh, one other thing from
Saturday. You mean Rivian, I think. You said Tesla, but I think you meant Rivian. Not having as many vehicles?
Yeah, others maybe not. No. Tesla have a small number of models. Right. So the less, if you've got 20 different car models and each one takes you a lot of engineering hours to sort of, get your full self-driving, your autonomy rolled out to, you don't actually want to have 20 or 30 or 40 different car models, and most of them don't. Realistically, they're just small variations. But you want a small number, so there's not too much work to do. But the other comment that came out on Saturday night was, we're catching up with my friend. He was saying that his wife basically drives with FSD supervised on all the time. And I was like, oh, well, why is she so keen on it? He said, well, she doesn't actually like driving that much. And she really actually appreciates that the technology kind of, takes that burden, off her to a degree. Like, she's obviously still supervising and still part of the experience, but she just finds it a whole lot easier. So, I'm sure there are some people that will be in that camp.
Yeah, I mean, even enhanced autopilot, in Auckland traffic, it's stop start. And so, if I happen to, I try and avoid going into the city in early morning. But if I end up on the motorway, I mean, enhanced autopilot is a joy because basically it'll just follow the car ahead of you, keep the distance. You don't have to think, brake, blah. I mean, if you're in a manual car, an old manual car, and stop-start traffic, putting it in and out the clutch, and you get your thighs getting sore, and it's a nightmare. And I mean, if you're in a Tesla with enhanced autopilot, at a minimum, you just don't have to worry about that. And in fact, I've never had a car accident, but the one time I would have had an accident and my Tesla avoided me having an accident, so my Tesla has saved me, is I was not using autopilot. I didn't have autopilot on at all, and I was in stop-start traffic because I thought, I'm just driving, and there was a queue or something, and so I'm kind of on the accelerator and then following the car in front, and then closing the gap. And then I happened, traffic was moving really slowly. And then I happened to kind of look down, and my phone like pinged or whatever. And I grabbed my phone, and then I looked up, and the car in front of me in the queue had like hard lights, stopped hard.
Yeah.
And as I looked up, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to hit that car. Didn't even have time to react. And then my Tesla's automatic, emergency braking kicked in, even though I didn't have autopilot on, and literally stopped me, 2 centimeters from the bumper. Calculated the distance absolutely perfectly, that it didn't brake too early, just braked exactly when it needed to. And I was like, that would have been a little mini fender bender because I got distracted. And so then I was like, well, I should use autopilot, because if I had autopilot on, I wouldn't have done that, So it was actually a case of like, well, it's better than me. So you have to give them credit. You have to give them credit.
And a lot of cars will do that braking, but I don't think probably to the same level as Tesla, who are constantly updating the software. Another friend of mine, he was saying if they picked up a Model Y, I don't know, maybe, when they first launched in New Zealand, and within days of having it, one of the family was driving it. I didn't want to say his wife because I keep giving these wife examples, but anyway, his wife was driving it, and actually was nothing to
his
do
Asian
with,
wife.
It was nothing
Get cancelled.
nothing to do with her driving, but somebody came into the intersection in a way that they shouldn't,
Right.
and and it wasn't just a simple brake because it was in front, it was at an odd angle, it was just like not what you expect a vehicle to be able to automatically handle, but it figured out the situation and I think swerved to avoid being in an accident, and they completely missed what would have been an accident.
Right.
So there is some pretty incredible autonomy that's going in there on from that safety perspective, and I guess that's also probably part of Tesla's overall safety picture, and it's what we should expect across any vehicle in the future. But I think at the moment it's Tesla that are kind of leading the way when it comes to software and safety. We'll see how that plays out longer, because you would expect everyone to be able to match up, but we're still in that world where there is in some ways quite surprisingly so, there is still that that reasonable difference between what Tesla are doing and what other automakers are doing, even though everyone else has kind of had years to to figure out and maybe to sort of take on board their approach to sort of software and designing their own chips and things like that. It still seems like there's a reasonable gap. So yeah. So yeah, we will see what happens next on the robo taxi front. But yeah, been certainly a really interesting time. I'll give one last example. Yesterday, actually trying to get to the airport, and I was in downtown San Francisco. I guess it had figured out mapping wise what was a smart way to go, which was sort of through the city streets rather than probably completely kind of freeway. I'd just come across the Golden Gate Bridge and basically needed to get back up towards the airport. And it took me through town, and most of the town was fine to get through downtown. But as we were kind of getting quite close to where you would enter the freeway again, the traffic kind of just stopped. And I don't know, there was a problem going on, but in the end, it decided to sort of cut across into the next lane, which was quite free, and take that lane. But we only had 140 meters to where it needed to sort of turn back and get back into the.
So it's like a lane jumper,
into the traffic. So
jumper.
It was like, what's going on here? Because both, I guess, both Waymo and Tesla do have some smarts around dealing with scenarios where things, freeze up and so on, and they will sometimes make a judgment call.
Get honked at as a queue jumper. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and actually, there was another example. We decided to go to In-N-Out Burger, one of those famous kind of American burger joints, and my son had never been, I don't know if he had been there or not, but he certainly couldn't remember going there before, and so he wanted to go. And there's this huge queue for the drive-through. Now, the car didn't know that we didn't want to go through the drive-through, that we did or didn't. We just put the destination in, and it had taken us there, took us into the car park. But the traffic was just a complete stall within this huge car parking area, and then it just ducked out to the side.
Right.
And I'm like, what the heck? That's crazy. And it was the right thing, because we didn't want to go to the drive-through. And so we did just want to park.
Right.
But at that stage, I took over and parked the vehicle. But yeah, if I hadn't have done that, I might have sat in that queue for another sort of 5 minutes, before thinking, actually, this is dumb, or maybe another 30 seconds. Who knows?
Yeah.
Anyway, back to the other scenario, I was trying to get onto the freeway, and it took me out into this other lane. I'm thinking, what's it going to do? And I just decided, look, I haven't been using the technology enough to trust it, whether it's going to pull back into the traffic, whether it's going to do something kind of, dodgy or dangerous. So at that point, I took over indicated back in and came back into the traffic myself because I didn't want to kind of get caught in it making another poor decision. So some of those decisions, you kind of judgment calls wise, you might not agree with what the technology is doing, and it didn't do it super fast. So I probably could have stopped it even, moving away from that lane. So, but there is this incredible fluidity to the way it drives, very human-like. So the feedback was, it's just like, oh, we don't even, notice that it's a being driven robotically in terms of, passengers in the vehicle. It's just like, it just feels like, it was like, oh, it just feels like you're driving, Paul. It's, it's just totally normal. Like,
I think a massive thing that's missing is obviously the interactivity of a human. So I mean, when you use full self-driving, you plug in an address and then it's just quietly doing it, and either has to do it perfectly or you take over, which is kind of one solution. But the thing that I always think is, imagine if you had some kind of merging of like voice-activated chat GPT and driving, then you could be more like a driving instructor, be like, hey, what are you doing? Don't pull out here. Like, why are you doing that? If it could actually answer you and you could talk to it and kind of teach it and say, okay, we've pulled into In-N-Out Burger. I don't want to go into the thing, find a car park, and then you're actually coaching it. That would be like a whole different level, because there are going to be scenarios where the car doesn't know what you want it to do. Like if you're driving with a friend, often you'll be like, pull in here, this is my friend's driveway. How's the car going to know? So if you could actually chat to it in real time, with 5G level type stuff, and it's like, oh, okay, cool, I'll pull in, and then you say park in the left driveway because such and such is coming home, do this, that kind of thing. That would just be the next level of awesome, and probably where it needs to go.
Well, and I imagine, that we will see an element of that, come through sort of future iterations. But it seems we are more at that kind of learner driver level. And in fact, the Waymo experience, when I left my my phone behind, after I was thinking of that later, and I was thinking in a dedicated robo taxi, like on its, it's a standard, Jaguar I-Pace, but with all their stuff added on, so it became a very expensive vehicle. Not the I-Pace was ever cheap, but you got a Jaguar I-Pace, and then you've got 100 grand worth of sensors and technology on top. But I can imagine in a more future, looking iteration, it's going to have cameras that are like, hey, Paul, that's your your phone sitting there in the center console or whatever, right? If you've left something behind, like that's not hard technology to have. So there's probably a whole bunch of iterations that we'll see, but to start with, the big issue is getting over the confidence that it's actually a safe driver. Waymo kind of keep that quite easy with a geofenced area. They just kind of pull over to the side of the road. They're not going through generally very complicated car parking scenarios that I saw, although they have to go and do that within their own complex, so they must have those capabilities. But I guess we'll get to those kind of next iterations over the years ahead, and let's see how the technology works. But I'm picking they'll figure out most of these issues, and they'll be able to maybe look ahead a little bit further at things like a street's blocked off, or in fact yesterday there was at the hotel there was a sort of not a road, entrance to a car park area that had been blocked off. I guess the car park was full, and it started driving towards it. Now, it would have got closer and it would have figured it out and probably turned us around. But I was looking and could kind of see that, much quicker than what it did. So there's a lot of these little nuances that, they're not necessarily showstoppers, but, they will and need to be improved over time.
Yeah.
Good. Now, I did say we're going to talk a little bit about, before we finish up, on Voyager. Any kind of news or anything to sort of share on what's going on in the business since we caught up recently?
Yeah, we're just trucking on. Probably the product we've been working on, same as last time, Voyager Cloud. So I think I even covered last time I was on. VMware kind of had a thing where they quadrupled their pricing. VMware's used for a lot of cloud type stuff. So we've developed our own Voyager Cloud product on OpenStack and changed a whole lot of things around, but that's allowed us to remove a whole lot of pricing, because VMware was a price component. So Voyager's now got virtual servers from $10 a month, New Zealand based. And it's interesting because initially in the early days of cloud, we didn't really have a cloud product, and obviously Amazon Web Services was like the leader, and everyone got really excited about it. But we're seeing more and more cases where, I saw an X post just a couple of days ago that I copied to my staff, and it was a company in the US that was, they'd signed up for a whole lot of AWS services, and they were spending, I think, $2,500 a month, and it had become this, kind of headache. And then they said, oh, well, I think their hashtag was like cancel cloud or something. They'd gone back to like a dedicated server with rack space, where it's still a cloud server, it's still outsourced, it's still whatever. But then their bill came down to like $250 a month because, AWS, they just keep on putting their prices up. They've got inflation. They charge for data in and out. They charge for database read accesses and things. And because it's so powerful and because it's so, tech people love it, the tech people say, oh, we've got to have this thing, give us the credit card, and all of a sudden it becomes this huge cost. But the cloud companies, Microsoft, Google, AWS, some of the pricing seems to have got completely removed from reality. And, local providers like Voyager or, others, New Zealand, there's Umbrella and that kind of thing. We seem to be able to deliver really, really good value at really good prices. So we're starting to get ahead of steam in terms of actually people discovering us and saying, oh, I want to go back to a dedicated tin, New Zealand supported, and actually the pricing is really good. I kind of felt a bit dejected for a few years that we would just be wiped out by the big guys and Amazon and even, Microsoft and everyone's kind of building data centers in New Zealand that's closer and closer to home. But we are seeing that their pricing seems to be, just kind of removed from reality. So I feel like we can compete and have a really good product to make really good margin, which is kind of exciting again.
That's great. Yeah, that's really pleasing. And I think it is important to, to recognize that, sometimes these technologies are not a perfect fit for every scenario. You still need to have a look and work out what is going to be appropriate. And I think one of the areas where AWS, Microsoft, Google have sort of, I guess, taken advantage of customers is there's been such a momentum of moving to towards their clouds that we've kind of accepted that instead of prices going down as they used to, we used to get more and more for our money with technology.
Yeah.
That in some areas of these cloud services, it has done what you say in terms of, prices have been going up rather than been going down. So, whereas with traditional, computing infrastructure, if we look back what we got for our money 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and then you flipped around to 15, 10, 5, etc., you're getting more and more and more bang for your buck.
Yeah.
That's for if you own the infrastructure. When it comes to the cloud, obviously there's some areas where that has happened, but things like storage, when it comes to in a lot of online environments, the cost of storage is not going down anywhere near as quickly as the cost of, say, disk storage has come down over the last decade, for instance.
Yeah, and I mean, I sort of feel like the big cloud providers almost get a bit of a free pass as well. And that there used to be a saying, I think it was that like you never get fired for choosing IBM, right? And so you're basically not going to get fired for saying, oh, we migrated to AWS and then AWS had an outage. So Google, AWS, and Microsoft have all had pretty giant outages over the last few years, and they seem to have them. Often each one of them will have more than one a year. Like Microsoft's had a couple of big Teams outages and things. And it's just like, oh, well, they're the big guys. And if that's what the situation is, people sort of accept it. So, Voyager, we had one in the last 4 years, we had kind of one large voice outage that lasted about 8 years ago, about 3 years ago, that was a result of a denial of service. So not really our fault.
Sorry, how long for?
About 8 hours, so it's quite significant.
Okay.
And we had obviously a lot of customers, pissy, but we're now spending large amounts of money with Cloudflare to protect against DDoSes that kind of don't necessarily ever happen, just to make sure that we don't get that. But denial of service is obviously, it's not a fault of our own. It's when a bad actor essentially overwhelms us with a whole lot of malicious traffic. So we were prepared to an extent, but just not with the amount of traffic we received.
Yeah.
So it took out our systems for a while. Anyway, we had a lot of customers leave, and fair enough, customers want 100% uptime. But we also had one small data center outage a couple of years ago, and we lost a bunch of customers, and then they went to AWS and things. And then those same customers said, oh, well, in the same time, you had basically one voice outage and one data center outage in like 4 years. But since we moved to AWS, we've had several outages, but the boss is fine because it's AWS.
Yeah.
So it's almost like we get like a harder run than like the big guys. We have to be more reliable. We have to be cheaper just to convince people to spend money with like a New Zealand company.
Yeah.
But that's fair enough. I mean, people want, with internet stuff, they want 100% uptime. And so we're always kind of improving. But it does grind my gear a little bit that sometimes you can do better than the big guys, but the big guys get a pass.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to be said for buying I
probably sound like a jaded guest now,
local. But, no.
But we do appreciate anyone out there wants to buy local. Yes, we very much appreciate that.
There you go. Yeah.
And you can ring me up and abuse me, which you can't do to,
Yep. Well, thanks everyone. We've had a long episode today, so thanks Seeby for for joining us and taking the time. Really appreciate it. If folks are interested, they can look up Voyager.nz.
Voyager.nz. Yeah.
Voyager.nz. If you're interested in catching a little bit more info. But thanks everyone for listening in. Of course, big thank you to our show partners. As always, for their ongoing support of the New Zealand Tech Podcast and of sort of the broader, technology and innovation ecosystems here in New Zealand. So thank you to HP, 1NZ, Gorilla Technology, Spark, and 2 Degrees. All right, well, that's us for this week. We will catch you again next week on the next episode of the New Zealand Tech Podcast.
Great. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Seeby.
Cheers.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.